So this is Linda Hughes at the Throwers News Network, TNN. Today I am conducting my first ever showcase interview with Ryan Seckman from Windsor, Colorado. Full disclosure here. Every chance I get to train with Ryan, I take, as I consider him to be a superb athlete and trainer. And with that, I'd like to ask you some questions.
Please.
All right. So can you give us a little bit of background on yourself first, and then how you got involved in the sport of throwing?
Sure. So I am currently 46 years old. I've been competing in the Highland Games since the late 90s. And I got started in the sport, like I said, in the late 90s. We had just had our daughter, McKenna, and I was looking for a way to continue to make sure that I stayed in good shape. And we were also living in an area where we were trying to kind of reach out and find other things to do. And then I had been watching the news and I saw that there was a Highland Games going on at the community college, and that reminded me of a long time ago watching Wild World of Sports with my dad, and they would have, all kinds of different athletic events on, and I remember seeing John Paul Sigmarsson wearing a kilt, and he was the world's strongest man at the time, and he was in a kilt and throwing cavers, and I remember bagpipes, and for some reason it just really stuck with me. So at that time I just went down to the festival the day of the event. I didn't have a kilt, didn't have anything, and at that time the games were still at the point where they were growing quite a bit, but they weren't like they are today. So you could go and basically sign up the day of to compete. So I just signed up and started throwing.
Wow, okay. As a thrower, what do you enjoy the most?
So for me, I think I have a pretty good balance of the things that I like, which I think is the reason I've kept with it for so long. And I think some of it is almost like phases of your life. So at certain points, so let's say in the beginning, it was the games and the competition were the best part for me. And that was probably because that's really all I got to do early on. Was I would go to the gym and do lifting and things to stay physically fit, but I only did the one games in Mesa, Arizona every year. I didn't travel, didn't do other games. So it was really just that single event. And then as I got to know other people from other states who came to the competitions, and even other throwers from other areas around Arizona, I quickly gained a group of people to train with, and then the training part became one of the more fun aspects of it, getting to not just do it once a year and hoping it went well, but getting to practice and really learn how much there is to it. And then now it's really a combination of everything. So I really love training, just being able to go outside by myself, go through a routine, get my practice in, but learn from my practice sessions. And then after doing it now for 20 some years, just going to the games is interesting just to see how over time I would go to the games and kind of have my game face on and be so concerned about how I was going to perform that I typically didn't perform to the level I wanted. And then I would look back and also find out that I really didn't have as much fun as I probably could have. So I think now just looking back at seeing all these different kind of phases in my career as an athlete, finding out that there's joy to be found in all of it, and a lot of it just depends on the timing, and also just taking the time to step away from the competition aspect of it and make sure that I'm really enjoying the event, I'm really enjoying the practice, I'm really enjoying the friendships. So I think that's kind of what I've experienced, and thankfully now I'm at a point where I really appreciate all of it, whether it's learning what to do. So right now I'm transitioning into planning my off-season training, and I really hadn't done that in the past. I kind of just continually trained, and I would start different cycles of programs at certain times, but I never took time to look at what works, what doesn't work, and what do I do now. So even now, after 20 years, I'm still learning new things, and I'm finding that there's something to enjoy out of every aspect.
Okay. And speaking of training, are there any people in particular that you can refer to as one of your main mentors or coaches or instructors?
Sure. So going back to the beginning of my career, I really was fortunate because I started in the Phoenix area, and we had a large games at that time, and it was run by an athletic director who was not an athlete, but she wanted to get more people engaged. So I was able to, find some people to practice with. And then through that, because it was the Phoenix Games and we were able to have the Women's World Championships every year at the time, just amazing female athletes coming in. So I remember Shannon Hartnett. And, a lot of my mentors, especially early on, were probably like most people's are today, especially with social media. They are people we may never meet in person, but you get to view them and observe them and see how they go about doing it. So Shannon Hartnett was probably one of my earliest ones because she was a top level competitor that I only got to see that one time a year, but she was just unbelievable how graceful she was with everything that she did, and you could really see the difference between just purely strength athletes and throwers. So that was probably my first person that I remember being someone that I would look at and try to emulate, whether it was emulate how she approached an event or just her technique in general. And then we were able to start a men's pro class in Arizona, and Ryan Vieira would come and do a clinic and judge for us, and I just became friends with Ryan and was able to talk to him outside of just the event. But he was probably, and probably still is, the most influential person that I've worked with in the sport. I think he and I have similar personalities, so I connected right away with his style of coaching, and he's also very good at the breaking down technique and trying to find words that associate with each person that he's working with, rather than just the typical track cues that are always out there. But for people like myself, I was not a thrower, so I never threw in high school, never threw in college. It was something brand new to me, starting out as an adult. So trying to figure out throwing and then figure out 9 events was really difficult. So Ryan was a really great mentor at that, and at the time they had these videos called Ultimate Heavy Athletics, and it was just this epic, slow, terrible VHS, real, I don't know what the word is, but not great photography, and it had the sound of lightning crashing and thunder in the background. But I watched it for hours, and then that whole group of people who participated in that, kind of were those mentors as well. And then as I started competing and doing more games in Arizona and helping out with things, then Andrew Hobson was a pro at that time, and we practiced every week. So then it became more local people that became those people who gave me advice and training. And then what I had found through that is, the thing I hear, which makes a lot of sense to me now, is Tiger Woods has a coach. So if Tiger Woods has somebody who is giving him technique, support, we all probably need it. So I always try to find people that I can learn from. And what's really interesting is it's not always the person you might expect. Mm-hmm. So you go and you start practicing with someone, and there's something that person innately has, or they've earned over time through whatever sport or activity that they had done. So you can learn from anyone. And what I would say is almost everyone, I think it's a Brian Oldfield quote, something to the effect of, everyone can serve a purpose, even if it's to be a bad example. So I probably learned as many things from competing in the games about what not to do from people that I watched and said, I don't want to perform that way. So those were things that I could kind of eliminate. And then reading the book on contrarian throwing from Mike and Mindy was training like a dog, where it's about continually reminding yourself and rewarding yourself for things that are right, and just continue to focus on those. So watching those other people throw, there were certain things that I understood, and I would think on those things, whether it's just creating an X or separation or using your hips, something like that. So I think you can learn from everybody, no matter where you're at today, and social media certainly has made that easier to do.
Okay, great. So what would you say the biggest changes are between when you started and now in the games?
I think the biggest changes in the games since I started would be the level of competition for sure. So when I started, at least in Phoenix, it was still a very large games. We had, gosh, I think at least 8 classes, and each class had up to 10 people in it. So we were at 80 athletes, and that was in the early 90s. And by the time I ran my last event there, we had 125 athletes. So, a lot of athletes, a lot of different groups. But I would say the skill level specific to the Highland Games has really ramped up since I started.
Why do you think that is?
I think a lot of it has to do just with the awareness of the sport itself. When I began, for the most part, there weren't near as many games in the state, so I think for everyone, they had a similar experience to me. They did their other things, and then once a year they would come, but people did not have their own capers. They didn't have their own weights. They probably had a stone or two, or they had things that they could do that were similar, but they didn't have sport-specific equipment. They didn't have sport-specific training sessions. They didn't, from what I remember, there weren't these like throwing groups, that you put on in your part of Denver. There weren't those places where you could go and really learn from someone. I remember most practices were by myself. If they weren't by myself for the first 5 years, it was myself and another gentleman, and he had zero experience as well. So we're trying to help each other as best we can, but we know nothing. We just know that throw went farther than the other one, so you probably should keep doing what you're doing. So just the fact that there are, all these groups available. There's also one of the challenges at the time was there weren't people who made equipment. So you either spent, $1,000 and got equipment, which most people didn't do, or you made your own. And there was a lot of just homemade equipment by practicing with people who didn't know the sport but loved it. So I think that's really been the biggest. And then I think additionally is just now, what I really appreciate now is, so for example, in Loveland, we have an athletic competition as part of a medieval festival. So when I began, I would say 90% of the actual competitions were at a Celtic festival. So you were limited in the fact that there were only a handful of Celtic festivals, in addition to only a few of them had the budgets to run games, whereas now there are many more opportunities inside of just the Highland Games or just the Celtic festivals, and now other festivals that expand. And some games have even just started as a group of throwers started an event, and then it has added on different things like pipers, dancers, clans, whatever that has to be. But yeah, I think just the growth in the skill level of athletes and in the opportunities for people to be exposed to it.
Okay. So out of all that, what do you think is the downside to the games itself?
That is a good question.
Are the changes that you've seen all necessarily good to the heart of the sport?
I think that in general they are, because more people have exposure to it. And I guess maybe a good example might be the Edgewater Games that returned to the Denver area this year, and the fact that they have been gone for quite a number of years since I've been here, at least 3 or more years, that they were not in that Edgewater area. And then they came back, and for one, there was immediately more athletes than it could handle. And the crowds, from day one, or from the time the gates opened, it was, I thought, really good crowds that whole time. So I do think that having a higher level of athlete competing is a good thing for the sport in general. For one, I think just for myself, I probably had a lot of injuries that were due to the fact that I didn't know what I was doing and didn't have somebody to say, what you're doing makes sense to your body, but you can't physically do that with a 42 or a 56 pound weight. What you need to do is just make this little adjustment. But instead, I just went out and said, I'm going to do 20 reps with the 56, and then, you end up having injuries from it. So I think there's a little bit of good and bad with that, but certainly more good in the fact that if I were a newer thrower and I were to come to an event anywhere in the country, I would see a higher level of athlete. So even if I only got to see them, I would see a person more likely doing it correctly. So I would probably avoid injury. And then I think too, what I really appreciate now is with so many classes and such a varied level of competition, you can come in and start at the novice level and compete with people at your own level, but there are people of every size, every shape, in every group, so you can really find someone. Like for me, that's why I really appreciated Ryan Vieira, was although he's much larger and stronger than me, we're somewhat similar. We're just under 6 feet tall, our arms are of similar length. I could see myself using his technique and his training methods to improve myself. I may never get to the level of the strength that he had or the level of throws, but like for me, when I watch videos of myself trying to always improve, I try to look at videos of Ryan and imagine that's me, and then look at a video of myself and see what am I missing. Whether it's a right foot turning, whether it's the hip coming through, whether it's staying back. Those are all things that the nice thing about having so many athletes now in the sport, that almost everybody can find someone and say, that person is similar to myself. I can either find things that they do well, or I can look at them and say, I see what they're doing, we're of a similar height, I should stop doing that. It doesn't work. So I think certainly that's been a positive overall.
Okay. So when did you make the switch to athletic director? What caused you to take that role on?
So it was actually very early in my career. So I had started doing the games like 98, 99 in Arizona, and Paul and Jeannie Smith had run it for about 10 years, and they started the Women's World Championships, and we were able to keep that going and growing every year. And then about 2 years in, so after my first year, because I could only ever do it that once a year and I wanted to do better, I would call her and ask her, could I borrow the equipment that I'd like to help run practices, I'd like to practice myself. So I think they immediately saw that I had an interest in it. And then the very next year they asked me to kind of help and watch what they did, see how they do the scoring program. And then within, I think, probably 3 years, I was running the games. So they had, they were not athletes. So for 10 years, they basically ran an event for everyone else, which was great. But for me, what I saw, I started to go to other games, and when I would go to an event, I quickly noticed that for the most part, if you have qualified judges and good equipment, that the games somewhat runs itself. Most people who go have an idea of what it is, so if you've got a good schedule and good judges who keep you on schedule and your equipment is good, as a person running it, like I saw from them, you don't have to be an athlete to run an effective games. You can just put a plan in place, make sure you have the right people and the right equipment, and it somewhat runs itself. So I thought early on, I was in my 20s, I thought I could figure this out. I've got some friends who will help me. Paul and Jeannie were there still to make sure that things ran smoothly and it was a good event. The Caledonian Society was very much in support of it, so I knew I had the support that it would be successful. So that's kind of been what I've tried to carry throughout is, for one, once you find something that you appreciate and you find value in it, invest in it. Don't just show up to anything and just participate. And I don't say that to make anyone feel as though they're not doing enough, but what I have found is you will learn to love that much more by participating in how it works than just showing up. So I understand some athletes come, do their competition, their main focus is their competition, but like I said, I did that for a number of years, and then becoming an athletic director and getting much more involved, you find different areas again that you kind of fall in love with. And you meet people you would not have met other than the throwers that you participate with, and you learn things about why things are the way they are, and then you can also contribute. We all have strengths, we all have a network of friends, we all have influence somewhere, and we have the ability, if we just kind of dig into those sports and things that we love, we can make them better by us being a part of it. So that was the kind of the things that I learned over time. I certainly know it made me a better person because it put stressors on me that I wouldn't have put on myself. I would have avoided rather than having conflict. But having to have had those conflicts, whether it was with a the society, whether it was with an athlete, whether it was with my self-training, just those things that really help you mature as a person. The more you participate in things like this, the better you become, and then the better the sport becomes.
Okay, I agree. And so that leads me to my next set of questions. What would you, if you had an opportunity to give advice to a person that's coming into the sport, what would you say?
So my advice to people who are interested in coming into the sport, and this happens a lot at the games, we'll be having the games, someone will come up and say, hey, how do I do this? What I always tell them is, don't wait. Because what I end up seeing most of the time is, I say to somebody, oh, well, we have an opportunity. So for example, when the games kind of kick off in Colorado and Wyoming in early June, we have an opportunity of basically a games every month, to participate in. So I tell them, hey, we've got a games next week. You should sign up in the C class and try it out. And they'll almost always, they'll say, oh, I need to, I'm in the gym, I just got back, I'm working on this, I'm working on that, or I need to lose some weight, or, something. But what I would say is you'll never be prepared. It would be, you'll never be prepared for a 9-event decathlon of athletic events during a day, unless you're a decathlete, which most people are not. And even then, they're doing totally different events than what we're doing. So, don't wait. Don't be worried about how you're going to look, if you are going to win, all of those things. They're really secondary to the fact that it's an experience, that if your brain tells you initially, I'm interested in that, you should just do it. Just get out there and do it. You'll find what's unique, I think, a little bit about our sport, and I hear this from people. Like I said, I didn't compete collegiately or in high school in track and field, but the people who come from those places say how much they like the sport for the fact that people are helpful. That not always, when you're competing against someone at a collegiate level or any other level, they're not really giving you a lot of pointers. They don't want you to necessarily improve. They want to win. Whereas in the Highland Games, a lot of it just comes down to wanting to do better for yourself. And that's the nice thing too about there being so many events. So there are enough events that if you're going to have 1 or 2 events that are just naturally going to come to you. So it's, I guess, no different than school, right? When you went to school, math was difficult, English was easy. So you had to put a little bit more effort into math, but the English part, you could do vocabulary, you could do writing. So that's how I have found this sport to be as well. There are certain things that come naturally, and you're able to quickly find out what those are, and then you can work on the fine points, which is one part of training. And then there are other events that are just difficult, don't make sense, your body can't get it, you're not strong enough, and that's where you really have to pour a lot of your time and effort into. But again, don't wait to start.
Okay, I think you've already touched on the next one. And what would you tell an athlete that is currently involved in the sport?
Right.
You kind of touched on that a little bit, but can you go a little bit further with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say, as a athlete in general in a sport, get involved, help the athletic director, see if there's anywhere that you could add value to the overall event. Again, for your own personal gain, there are things that you're going to learn and experience that you would not have had you not participated. And secondly, a lot of times, at least for me, having done that, that's how I got to meet the Ryan Vieiras, the Larry Brocks, the Andrew Hobsons, the Shannon Hartnetts. Was, I'm sitting out here. So for example, if you go to Estes Park on the day the pros are there, it's one thing to be an athlete and watch professional athletes or the elite women compete on those days and watch them and be amazed by them, but there's not enough time to actually engage in it. But if you participate somewhat in how do those athletes get there, what do those athletes do after the games are over, things like that, and you participate with the organization, all of a sudden you're now having personal conversations with professional athletes, and they're just going to tell you little bits and pieces. So for me, like I said, I had the benefit of working with, watching Shannon, but then working with Ryan Vieira, and it took years. I mean, there are still things. Linda and I trained together, and there are still things that I just can't quite get. But every year I get something out of it. And then the nice thing is then you now have that experience of, hey, somebody, so for example, I've been working with Joey, and Joey and I were having a conversation on weight for distance. So he and I are both athletes who've done this for a while, and we hear cues from other people saying to, for example, in the weight for distance, you need to create an elliptical type orbit, right, like at a 40 some degree angle to get the weight to go out. But yet you're swinging a weight as a pendulum in front of you and in back of you. How do you transition this into this, right? You're changing the plane of the weight. So that speaks to the fact that there's always something to learn as an athlete. Don't ever stop asking questions. When something doesn't make sense, find someone that does that event well and have them help you break it down into, it's like a lot of people get the event in general, but there's a specific starting point that they just can't get past. So that was kind of it for Joey. It was, how do I get the weight from this to being out here? And we talked about when the weight comes back, you want to settle with it, and then you use your hip to kick the weight into a different plane. So always ask questions, always be learning. I do think there's a great value in videotaping. If you can videotape yourself or have someone videotape you, you learn so much, because you'll do the throw and you'll think you have done everything. But if you can take the video and look at it again, compare it to somebody who does it well, you can quickly see this is something that I'm not doing. Then work on that area. Always positively reinforce yourself, when you're doing things right. If you're doing something wrong, don't think about what it is that you're doing wrong. Think about what it is that if you were doing it right, it would make you more effective at what you're doing.
Good point. Okay, so you are the athletic director, and you run the games in Loveland the first week of June, and you also run the games in Cheyenne, Wyoming the second week of June.
Right.
So what advice would you give to an athlete considering coming to those games?
So I would say come with a positive, open attitude. Be really open and receptive to just what's going on. So for people coming to those early events in the season in Loveland and Cheyenne, I would just say don't come with any preconceived notions in your mind of the reason I'm going there is because I want to win whatever group it is that you're participating in. I would say come with an open mind, knowing that things are going to happen outside of your control. So for one, especially with our sport, we do an outside event. So there are many variables. Whether it's, I may place the trig here one year in Loveland, but something happens to that piece of ground that I can't use it, so we've got to move the trig over. So there's always going to be variables in our sport. And what I would say is that's one of the things that I've come to appreciate, especially as you have the opportunity to go out and do other games. Initially, you're a little bit bummed by it because you've thrown this RMSA open stone every year for the past couple of years at every games, and you finally figure it out. And then you go to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the stone is totally different. And as soon as you put it in your hand, your mind's just racing like, I can't figure this stone out. It's going to come off my fingers. It's going to do this, going to do that. So I would just say what I've learned for myself is go in and appreciate all of it, right? Appreciate the venue that you're going to. Appreciate the athletes that are participating with you. There are great judges and athletic directors who've done this for a long time that really do have some wise words. So, listen for those things that really resonate with you. Find people that you have some similarities with that you can connect with on a throwing level, and also find people you might be able to practice with. But again, don't be afraid of that first competition. Go out, have fun, do your best. I've done, I don't even know how many competitions now, but there's always going to be, at least for me, there's always a component of a nervous energy about it. But what I've learned, like through the contrarian throwing, is, for one, appreciate the struggle. The struggle is what you're going to be in the majority of the time. So you're going to always be in these different little areas of how things are going, whether it's at practice, whether it's in life, whether it's at the event. Some things are going to go great. Other things, even though you practice and you've got it down, one thing's going to throw you off. So just appreciate that. That's part of it. We're going to be there 80% of the time. So learn to be okay in that space. And then with that nervous energy that you have, think of that nervous energy as a positive force that's going to help you like be a little more aware of your surroundings. Don't think of it as a fear that you have about how you're going to perform, because it really is, I guess, just part of our human nature, right? It's a response that we have to it, and the benefit of having a larger brain should be that we're able to take that energy and say, I'm going to use it so that I'm aware of my surroundings, I can feel things, because I know, like, again, working with Linda on some things, it's really been interesting to see how each of us has different words that associate with a feeling inside of ourselves. And then also, so for example, like the grip on the weights for distance, there is something tactile about the grip on a weight for distance that you'll start to feel, and you'll have a grip and you'll feel like this is a good solid grip. Then you can relax your body, relax your arms, and do those things. Whereas if you're so caught up in a concern for how am I going to look when I do this, or am I going to beat the guy who just went before me, that you're not going to feel those things. So I would say be open to that. Like, take the time, take a deep breath, and each event that you do, take the time to have some feelings about it, right? Feel the rock, feel the weight, feel the tacky on the hammers. And then again, like I said, especially like with the hammers, I'll notice people will come into their first games and they'll never have experienced tacky before. So we put this product on the hammer so that we can swing it fast and it doesn't come out of our hands. But the first time you feel it, you are pretty convinced that you're either going to lose all of your skin or at least dislocate your shoulders. So it's okay to feel those things, right? That's why we get 3 attempts at everything. On that first one, just kind of feel it, see how it feels, take your whines, let go of it, whatever happens, happens. So I've had experiences at games where I had a hammer come out and it went at least 100 feet way, way, way to the left. It hit a cement ramp, went through spectators, so everyone in the festival is looking right at me. So I've had that happen. I've fallen down multiple times. So anything you do isn't the most embarrassing thing that has ever happened at a games. Just, again, laugh at it, make sure everybody's safe, learn something from it, like what did you feel while you were doing that caused it to do what it did, and then just move on to your second throw. Don't worry about it. So yeah, just get started, don't wait, have fun, appreciate the event around you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.